Good evening, folks. Thanks for joining us for our council meeting for the 21st of March. For those of us in the gallery and also those that are streaming at home and wherever you may be at the moment, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners and the land of which we are meeting, also the land owners of those where you may be watching our meeting from this evening as well, and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to those from the other communities who are here with us, for they hold the memories, the tradition and culture of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Folks, item 3 is apologies and requests for leave of absence. Just a reminder, Councillor Watson remains on leave through until the 22nd of March, inclusive of tonight's meeting as well. Yes, Councillor Quilty.
Sorry to interrupt, may I ask a question? I think it's good to ask it publicly because other people, other councillors might want it for future reference. In case a councillor takes leave, is that correct, or am I not correct in saying that it requires a resolution of the council to grant leave to a councillor?
It's an interesting one, Councillor Quilty, because you can't decline it. So if I'm correct, I'll just check with the Governance Officer. The Act doesn't allow us to decline leave of councillors, is that right? It's an interesting one, Councillor Quilty. Does that answer your question? Great. So that being said, I intend myself to take some leave, and I'll give you the upcoming dates now for the 29th to the 31st of March, which is a 3-day period in the middle of next week, where I will be out of town, and also for the 15th to the 30th of April. So, councillors, are we happy for that to be recorded in the minutes? You so move that I take leave. Have you got a seconder, Councillor Mildred? Yes, thank you very much. So yeah, you've got those date ranges to reflect upon there. Yeah. Yes, yep, 2-week period. Thanks, Councillor Hall. And Councillor Simpfendorfer as Deputy Mayor will act in the Mayor's role in my absence. Item 4, the declaration of the Acts, Regulations, Codes and Local Laws. Acting CEO, nothing. Declaration by councillors of any conflicts of interest at item 5. Councillors, I haven't been made aware of any forms being submitted. It doesn't mean you can't declare one now. No. Thank you. Delegates' reports, there's none. Reports for determination. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Number 6. Confirmation of minutes from the previous meeting. Page 4 of 82 is where you find the recommendation. Councillor Bennett, happy to move as per recommendation. If we've got a seconder, thank you. Councillor Hall, does anyone wish to speak against? No, thank you very much. We've got that confirmed. As I said, no delegates' reports. Reports for determination opens up at 8.1. This is the priority projects for 2021-2022. For those that pay close attention to the organisation, obviously at last year's budget we'd set aside considerable funds to focus on a couple of things within the community, and there was an update there in that report. But councillors, has a recommendation on page 6 of 82. Is anybody going to move a motion? Councillor Bennett, as per recommendation. Yeah, do we have a seconder? Councillor Simpfendorfer, Councillor Bennett.
As the Mayor said, this is just prioritising our projects to make sure that's really transparent about what they are, particularly pertinent going into a looming federal election and a state election. So this is about reallocating the matching funds from unsuccessful projects. And the project that we've got here to undertake a feasibility study is the Senior Citizen Centre. And it does take a bit of work to have something fully designed, which is what federal and state need to fund something. I did have one question though. So on page 7 with the list of projects, the 2 ones that are unsuccessful, can I just get some commentary on why they were unsuccessful?
Thanks, Acting CEO.
Through you, Mr Mayor. We were notified by the department that the Wodonga Township one was because we haven't actually updated our past Wodonga structure plan and felt that there was a significant amount of work done for us then to move to the next step, because this one was around how do we activate the township as opposed to the planning for the township. So that was that one. The senior citizens one, we weren't notified of the reason why. We were only notified that it was oversubscribed, and so therefore we missed out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett and Acting CEO. Councillor Simpfendorfer. Reserving the right. Councillors. Councillor Mildren.
Question is this effectively a budget reallocation? This is basically to amend the budget in effect.
Thank you, Acting CEO.
Through you, Mr Mayor. This money was set aside in the budget with a resolution that stated if we were to reallocate the money or if we were to spend it or want to allocate it to a different project, then we had to come back to council for a resolution for that approval. So the 500,000 was for councillors to approve what that money was to be spent on and what projects.
Councillor Mildren, yeah? Okay, yeah. Councillor Hall.
Yeah, look, in principle, I support expanding, an expansion and development of the senior citizens building going forward because, from what I've had feedback, it's starting to become, it's a bit small for the dancers and I think it's getting a little bit tired, although they did do some work on it some time ago, but I think we need to have a bigger look at where we go with that forward. So I sort of agree in principle with that. One of the things I am a little bit concerned is I don't want to get into the position that we get this feasibility plan and what have you, because it does say in here it would include, the next phase of the project would include detailed design. Would that come after the feasibility study or is that included with this going forward?
Question to you, Acting CEO.
Through you, Mr Mayor. So this will take us through to undertaking the feasibility study and having some early concept plans that would show us what it would look like. So it wouldn't take us right to tender stage. There would be more work to do, but it would take us to the point where we had a concept that we knew what sorts of programs we would put in there, commercial and community.
Thanks, Acting CEO. Sorry, thanks, Councillor Hall.
In the report, it does state a lot of things that the feasibility study will include. And, whether commercial activation identified, tourism, product development. I do suppose I said in principle, but I just get a bit concerned because I don't want to see this come back to us and we and the community don't get, it's basically almost set in stone. We don't get any input into it. And that's one of my concerns, that maybe we should be more involved earlier on in the piece and the community involved more earlier on in the piece. But also to, because there's also the issue, is there a rebuild or is it a knockdown or is it, there's a lot of issues and things to be decided. So my concern is not getting to the stage where it's like, well, we've gone this far and we're just going to move forward with it without,
Thanks, Councillor Hall. Councillor Quilty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The question I have has partially been discussed just then. I will still voice it, and I think I'll sort of have a bit of a side to it. What happens, the process. I would like to know a bit more at what stages of the process community gets involved. The report did mention community consultation or designing the process for community consultation. My aim, I do also support this initiative. I think our senior citizens need a very nice center, and I just want us to make sure that community stakeholders, interest groups are involved in it, that it goes out extensively for community consultation, and I would like to see it reflected in the resolution. I actually don't have an alternative resolution because I wasn't sure how to word it, because this comes under the delegations. So in principle, if we didn't try as hard as we can for transparency, it could be just done under the delegation, but just the dollar amounts. But because it's such a strategically significant piece of infrastructure, we are discussing it today, and I would like to make sure that we discuss it. Definitely it comes back to council, and definitely we include extensive community consultation and consultation with interest group in the process. So perhaps, I don't know whether it's a good point to discuss it now, but I do support this recommendation, especially given that it's already been budgeted for and we're just reallocating, reshuffling the amounts. But I would like to see the resolution to include assurance for community consultation and for a good brief with the council. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Quilty. I'm just going to take liberty, if I can, acting CEO, because I think there's a question sort of with a common theme across both councillors' discussion then. I think it's around perhaps highlighting the assurance that the community are part of that ride along, I guess, the future vision of the facility. I know at the councillor briefing we also had a discussion around the importance of the senior citizens is what it is now, and that being the, you know, the starting point, and then everything else would be obviously added on any benefit. But if you want to clarify or refer to an officer.
Officer Hogg, who will be able to talk about this because she was looking at the project originally when we put it to RDV for funding.
Just to reassure councillors, a formal path of the feasibility would definitely involve consultation with existing stakeholders, broader stakeholders and the wider community. That would be an absolutely fundamental part of designing and securing some of the available options going forward, and you would hope that at the end of that feasibility there would be a number of options with what those implications and parameters are that absolutely reflect the community's themes that have been discussed and brought forward. So that's where most of the intel would come from in influencing the feasibility or informing the feasibility with whoever was to undertake that work. So independent of council, but it would definitely be designed, an integral part of that scope would be an engagement plan with the community, absolutely.
Thank you, Officer Hogg. Sorry, I was going to ask one more, just an extension of that, because this is probably the first significant project, I think, as a councillor group, we've probably seen that sort of body of work done with the futuristic plan. Have you got an example of where that's been done well before? I'm going to guess some sporting facilities or different things where that community engagement is part of the process.
I think the most recent example would be definitely Barranduta Fields in the development of that, all the planning that undertook before we actually got to concept and then detailed design phase. And another recent example would be Hyphen. So as a part of that feasibility, it definitely, the consultant was engaged to talk to existing stakeholders and community, but also far broader stakeholders and community to see what other opportunities existed in the community, but also look at the wider offerings, the niche that's offered, what the gaps in the market are, etc. So.
Thanks, Officer Hogg. Councillor Quilty had another question.
Thank you for the explanations. Officer Hogg, you mentioned that there were the words independent of council. What did that mean?
The feasibility would likely to be undertaken by a consultation, so there would be a procurement process to that, but there would be a strong scope that sat behind that procurement, articulating the level of engagement and consultation, but the feasibility is likely to be undertaken by an independent agency of council.
Thanks for that. Does it, and if it does, then when, at what stage does it come back to us, councillors?
Thank you, Officer Hogg, or Acting CEO. Which one? Acting CEO, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Quilty, what we can do is we can, normally what we would do is just ensure that it's in the the scope or the brief for the project, and then it would come back, because one of our core people that we would consult with the councillors themselves. So we would expect the consultant to come and talk to councillors. If councillors are not reassured by that approach, we can bring back the scope that actually, or send the scope out to show you that community consultation, broad community consultation, is part of the process by the independent or the consultant that we procure. So it doesn't matter either way. If there's a feeling around the table that you want it to be brought back to council prior to tendering it out, then we can do that, if that gives you a level of comfort. However, we would normally have that in something as significant as that building in a strategic precinct such as that.
Thank you, Acting CEO. I'll turn to the mover and seconder as to whether they consider an amendment or whether they wanted to push on with the motion as is. Yeah, thank you. Councillor Mildren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm still somewhat confused. Somewhat, so that's normal. So the amount of money that we have in total allocated here is 460,000, is that correct? Sorry.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Council approved $500,000 to be allocated towards a set amount of projects, and if those projects were unsuccessful or the money wasn't spent, before we could use it on anything else, it had to come back for council resolution, for council to approve, to say, okay, we weren't successful in that funding. Can we now, is council okay if we were now to allocate that funds that would have been spent on a project to another one, still part of the priority projects though? And I think that question was led by Councillor Hall, wanting it to come back to council.
Thanks, Acting CEO. Councillor Mildren.
Thank you. I think my question was, in total, we have an amount of money that we already allocated that was to be there if we could get a grant, and that was going to run the project in that form. Are we putting the 200,000 that's under this motion with the other amount of money, and in total to this project, to the Senior Citizens Project, is that 460? So it's total 200. What happened to the other money that was originally allocated to the project on the assumption that we would get a government grant to make it?
Through you, Mr Mayor, we had 110,000 that council had allocated towards senior sits, and we were trying to get a grant of $350,000. We were unsuccessful in that grant for $350,000, so that leaves us 110,000 for the senior sits, which we, when we were looking at prices of feasibility studies, we didn't think 110 would be enough to take us to the stage we needed. Therefore, we're coming back to ask for 90,000 more to go towards senior sits, a total of 200,000. So that leaves remaining funds of 200, that left remaining funds of 295. We're suggesting 200 go to senior sit, so there'll still be $95,000 left. If we've got 500, we've committed.
Sorry, just to clarify, so essentially out of the original $500,000 approved from council, even if 200,000 was spent on the senior sits instead of the 110, had we been able to get state government funding to match, we've essentially still got it would be $205,000 remaining. Is that right? For across the entire project, yeah. Yeah, is that right, Narelle? Director of Finance and all the good things. Come on, Narelle, help us out, do your maths. Where's the abacus?
I think I can see where Councillor Mildren is confused. with the senior citizens project, it's saying that the estimated costs to take the project to full tender stage of 460,000. So that's including the detailed design, which we're not doing at this point in time. We're only doing the feasibility, which is for 200,000. If the feasibility is favourable and you want to take it to tender, then we'll be up for another 260,000 at that point in time for detailed design prior to tender. Does that help?
Councillor Mildred, did you want to speak for or against the motion?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Again, basically I support the principle of doing the project with the senior citizens. I'm very concerned that, as it has been raised by other speakers, I'm very concerned that council has a significant level of influence in how this project transpires. And in that context, I'd like to move an amendment to the motion that that the following project be approved for funding to undertake a feasibility study, with the brief to go out to consultants for the feasibility study to be brought back to council for approval. With the brief for the feasibility study to be brought back to council for approval.
Thank you, Councillor Mildred. Does Councillor Mildred have a seconder for that? Councillor Quilty? Councillor Mildred, speak to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think this is, I think it might have been yourself who said previously that this is probably the first significant project that this council term has undertaken, and indeed it's probably close to the most significant project for the last term and this term. The last term we spent a lot of time finalising projects that were commenced before our time on council, which is a good thing because that means we got continuity and everything else. But we haven't had a project like this. This is going to be a very significant project that is going to have all sorts of implications, not just technical, you know, how much it's going to cost, not just technical, what things do we need in there, not just technical, what physical things can we do to achieve commercial realities. It's going to have political implications. It's going to have competition between various user groups over seeking to have the services and infrastructure built into the project to meet what they require. And there's going to be an awful lot of need for cloth cutting. And I think we should, as councillors, not abrogate our responsibility in that regard and take it up right from the start and put together or have a solid input in the brief that goes out to deal with the feasibility assessment and indeed things that come after that as well. So I think that's important and I think it should be part of the motion, and that's why I moved the amendment. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Mildred. Councillor Quilty.
If somebody else wants to speak for or against, I'll reserve my right to speak. Thank you.
Councillors? No. Rights reserved. The floor's yours, Councillor Quilty.
Thank you. Not for long. All I have to say, I don't see why not. Yes, Councillor Mildred has made a good suggestion. I think it sort of answers the concern that I voiced earlier. If the councillors can have a look at the results, at the brief of the feasibility study, I don't see why not. It shouldn't be beneath us. It's an important strategic decision. We should do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Quilty. Councillor Mildred, in closing? Nothing further. Therefore, put the motion, councillors. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried. Thank you very much. Amendment carried. Amendment becomes the motion. Yeah, valid point. All right, so The amendment has become the motion, councillors. Does anyone wish to speak for or against? Oh, hang on, Councillor Hall, are you moving? Yeah. All right, so the amendment is the motion. I'm looking around the room. Happy for it to be put, councillors? Yep, I therefore put it. All those in favour? All those against? Thank you, carried. On to item 8. Don't worry, Councillor Hall, I wasn't on my own. We haven't had to do one of those in a little while. Item 8.2 is the councillor briefing policy. There's a recommendation on page 11 out of 82. Councillors, would somebody like to move a motion? Thank you, Councillor. Did you have your hand up first, Councillor Hall?
No, I'm happy to second it.
Councillor Quilty, you're moving and you've got a seconder in Councillor Hall. Away you go.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Hall, for letting me move it. I think it has been a bit of a trend with me lately. I don't move the motions as per recommendations very often, and I'm really excited to have an opportunity to do one. I think our new council briefing policy is a nice step towards increasing transparency. We are looking at making our briefings briefings, strategic sessions, which are also kind of briefings under a different name, open to public. We're looking at live streaming them just like we do with our meetings. We are looking at, we are not going to have the reports that are presented at the briefings published, but we are looking at publishing place, date and time and the list of matters to be discussed. Obviously, the matters marked confidential under the Local Government Act are not going to be broadcast to the public. Everything else will. It will certainly require tiny bit more discipline, which is a very small sacrifice in comparison to the benefit we're getting, which is increased transparency and increased community awareness of what the elected councils are doing. So I really like this. I think it's a positive move. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Quilty. Councillor Hall.
I'll reserve my right.
Thanks, Councillor Hall. Councillors? Oh, Councillor Simpfendorfer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My first look at this paper and the recommendation, I was of the view to ensure we continue to be transparent in our process and how we operate as councillors, and the decisions that are made was initially, in principle, to support. Upon delving a bit deeper into the policy and the risks associated to recommending these changes and the advice from legal representatives is very clear. It could cause some confusion for our community, in my opinion, and the opinion of the legal advice. As the council, you know, the briefing is a preparatory and a preliminary meeting for councillors to ask open questions or clarification points. We don't normally get that, generally that view within the council meetings. It's a debate issue. With that advice from the legal advisors, I did tend to lean towards changing my view on this. So I'm very much for some transparency, but I'm not sold that this is the point where we need to be as transparent or even more transparent than what we already are and what we are with these meetings and these council meetings. So I'll be interested to hear the debate, but at this stage I'll be voting against this motion.
Thanks, Councillor Simpfendorfer. Before I come back to you with the reserved right, Councillor Hall, I'd just like to point out a little something north of the river at the moment tonight. I believe they're briefing on the fact that they might close some of their New South Wales local government meetings in forms of briefings to the public, which they have experimented for some years of having them open. So I believe that may be on some agendas north of the river today. But that's just maybe irony, I'm not too sure. But Councillor Hall, you reserved your right. Hang on. Thanks, Councillor Hall. Councillor Bennett.
So I want to start off by talking about what the experts have said in their opinion on opening up briefings to the public. In October last year, the Chief Municipal Inspector and the Operations Manager for Local Government Inspectorate met with councillors, and I did go back and read the transcript as well, and they looked over our existing briefing policy and they were happy with our existing briefing policy, and they really are one of the experts in this area. As part of this investigation, I did ask for the legal advice, which is the same thing I asked for when we were contemplating opening up our these meetings to the public, because that was obviously a big factor. So Maddox, with their legal advice, they've looked at the for and against, and I'll read out some of their quotes that they've given. So they've said that the streaming of preliminary content may reflect possible courses of action considered by council but not actually adopted, and that could mislead the public. As well, discourage members of council staff who prepare briefing papers from being frank and fearless in their explanation of the matters, which may interfere with council's deliberative processes and inhibit its ability to perform its functions to the extent that it discourages giving frank advice in briefing papers. So for me, that's a pretty serious risk. No other Victorian councils live stream their briefing, and I think probably the reasons above might be why that is so. So for me, briefings are an opportunity to look at our draft agenda and to ensure that it has the info that councillors need to make an informed decision, and so community can read it and have a good idea what it is. So for example, a report comes up, say the 3-bin system in the briefing process, and I say, okay, I see we're ranked 3rd. What are the first and second councils doing that we're not? We're going to have a 4th bin. What are the financial implications of that? What about if bins were emptied differently? What kind of model would that look like? So this, of course, is information there's no way that the officers could give us on the spot. And if they, for some bizarre reason, could, we'd be here for 8 hours, and absolutely no one wants to be here for 8 hours. The difference is when you raise it in briefing and then you get the full response back from the officers, that ensures that all councillors have the same information, and it gives us enough time to digest that before we make our decision, and so we don't have to make decisions on the run. For me, an issue is I don't think some councils are using the current briefing process. I think instead at meetings at the 11th hour, things come up, pretty serious things that really should have been brought up in the briefings. And I think that's pretty poor form, because we shouldn't be making decisions on the fly. We should be making decisions with all the information set out in front of us. So a good briefing process will ensure that we're not going down dead ends and we're making the best use of our time. For example, an item came up about selling the Willows last year. And during the statutory meeting, Councillor Mildren had a problem with one of the wording around that particular meeting. So that item didn't proceed. It had to then go back. They went back to lawyers, and the lawyers were completely happy with all the wording. So again, that item come back up for the 2nd time. So I don't think that's a good use of officers' time, and I don't think items should be coming up twice. Another issue for me is the briefings aren't constricted by meeting protocols. So if councillors say something that isn't correct, in this format, really the officers don't have any ability to actually correct that information. That information then gets reported, and sometimes that's not factual, and I don't think that does anything for community engagement and understanding. For me, if the officers and councillors don't feel like they can have frank discussions at briefings, that might mean we just abandon briefings altogether. But those discussions do need to happen, and you know what, maybe they're happening elsewhere. Interesting to note, in the recent Supreme Court case against Warrnambool, it was found that one of the factors that showed that some councillors had a predetermined view coming into a vote was that these councillors were having private little off-site meetings where they decided how they were going to vote on block. Interesting to note. So I think we need to safeguard against things like this happening, and our existing policy does this. I think it provides a really safe space to ask those dumb questions, to request more information, request more modelling, which takes time, and that ensures that councils and community get the best possible reports. The transparency needs to be happening right here in this forum. This is when councils need to be really upfront and honest about all the different factors that they've weighed up in forming their decision, and I hope that councillors can work together with the existing structure we have in place, with the intended purpose, and it's that purpose that also the inspectorate says that we already have got right.
You just escaped the time call then, Councillor Bennett. Very close. Councillor Mildren.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's many things we can say about this, and frankly, we use our briefings as a choreography program to decide what happens in our council meetings, by and large. It's tacit, it's quietly done, and it's well institutionalised into our organisation. I look at firstly, there was no council resolution to ask for legal advice to be obtained. There was a request by a single individual councillor, as I'm led to believe, which is interesting in itself. But secondly, the request for legal advice was on the question was on what basis, not basis, but what basis could council decide not to disclose officer reports and papers presented at a councillor briefing? That's the question that was asked. Now, what I'm hearing around the table is the use of that advice in a different context to the question that was asked. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if officers are afraid to give frank and fearless advice in reports in a briefing meeting because it's going to be open to the public, what does that say about what they're doing in council meetings? Open council meetings like this, if the officers are afraid of giving advice fair and frank and open in a briefing situation, then, well, are we not getting it in the council meetings for the same reasons? I think that's an absolute nonsense, and the legal advice, certainly in my observation of it, doesn't imply that that is a response to the question. There's a whole range of things that come out of this. We don't have oversight committees at Wodonga City. Almost every other council in Victoria has one or more oversight committees that actually are open and transparent to the community, and many of them are actually open to the public. We have a situation here where we just don't have oversight committees. Everything is done behind closed doors in a briefing meeting. Now, I find that extraordinary. I'd be very happy to find a happy medium somewhere in the middle with this, but over the many times that we've talked about trying to put oversight committees in place, there's been barriers put up every time. And to me, that just means let's keep the status quo, let's keep things buried the way they are, let's keep choreographing council meetings as best can be done, etc., etc. And to me, I think this policy that's the draft policy that's here, is worth putting out for public consultation. It's worth going out to see what the community has to say about all this. And if the community comes back and says, you're all idiots, well, we change it. We change what's in there. Or if the community comes back and says, oh, look, I'd prefer that the council didn't do this in the public arena, then we change it. But let's see what the public have to say about the document. It's been through a process where it got majority support when the request was made to amend and change the policy to reflect this outcome. So let's take it the full step and let's put it out to the public and see what happens. If it comes back with negative, let's change it. I'll be happy to come up and say, I got it wrong, I'll vote the other way. But as it is at the moment, we should be putting this out to see what the community thinks. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Milter, and Councillor Hall, you'd reserved your right.
Look, I probably may go over a little bit of what has already been said, especially with Councillor Mildrum, but back in November, the council voted 6-1 to support, a briefing policy that would be, a policy that would open our briefings to the community. There were 3 points that were included in that notice of motion. Or that motion that was recommended. The subject of opening our briefings to the public has been an ongoing discussion over time. It's been with this. I think we've even discussed it. Yeah, we have. We've even discussed it at the last council meeting. It keeps coming back up. This came up with the when we're doing the Junction Place situation. I think the community see that they want us to be more open and transparent at what goes on at council, and the briefing, a briefing policy that's open, that allows open to the public is a way forward with that. I recall the officer report including council sorted legal information from McLeod's barristers solicitors back in 2018 when we were looking at first opening our council meetings live streaming them. From the Maddox lawyers' report provided, there is some differences, but basically much the same. There were risks, which all councillors acknowledged with that legal advice. As with everything, there's always risks. We decided as a council to take that risk and go forward, as have probably nearly every council in Victoria now, and across the state, especially with the COVID situation coming into being. So, you know, I think we can navigate any legal possibilities or risks involved. We have done since we've live streamed our meetings. I haven't heard of a lot of issues statewide with live streaming and the legal. We all know where we stand with our code of conduct, so you know, I think that that's just an issue that we can deal with. The other thing is many councils do have committees, example of planning or finance committees. Many councils open those up to be live streamed. I've seen a couple of meetings that are live streamed, committee meetings, and they work well. We don't have that opportunity here, so the briefing is another avenue that we can open up and can, you know, let the people see how we make decisions, well, we don't make them in briefings, but what information comes across the table and what questions get asked. There probably won't be a lot of people watching on, but it gives people that opportunity if they want to see how our council works. I don't see there's any problem with this policy, and you know, I think we need to take that step and, you know, go forward with it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hall. Again, very close to time. Councillor Quilty, in closing.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before I speak, may I ask Councillor Bennett a little question? Could you please repeat for me the name of the case you just quoted?
Yep, that was the Warrnambool City Council case in the Supreme Court. Because they fired their CEO, and then the CEO took that and it went to the Supreme Court, and it was found in his favour. Interesting transcript. Oh, I'm not sure the exact title was. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Councillors, I am alarmed to know that there is legal precedent against councillors having lunch together. Oh my God, I'll make sure I'll read the transcript. Jokes aside, I take on board my colleagues' views that councillors may slip accidentally and break a couple of rules by voicing predetermined views. Like I said, we'll have to exercise a bit of discipline and watch ourselves. But as I said before, it is a small sacrifice towards giving transparency. There are risks that we want to take. Believe me, everyone knows my background. Not striving for transparency, community inclusion, democracy has lots of risks, maybe long-term, not short-term, and it's a slippery slope. Also, I'm 99% sure, because nobody can be 100% sure of anything. I'm 99% sure that our officers give us frank advice during council meetings. I don't see why they can't do the same thing during council briefings. No other councils do it. Councillor Bennett, you quoted yourself saying that you asked what can we do to become the first in our waste management. I commend you for that, and I think if that was broadcast, it would have served you really well, and it will serve you really well in your political career, and I wish you all the best. I would like, and I think things like that, things that show that we strive to be the best, should be broadcast. And if the councillors are frank and open and they say, we need to come back to you, it's also very good. It shows to the community that our officers are responsible and strive to get us the best information and to do their research. I take this opportunity to now ask councillors and officers, what can we do to be the best and the first in state of Victoria and maybe in entire Australia to be the first in our transparency and community engagement? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Quilty, for the inspirational and passionate closing. It's noted. Councillors, I therefore put the motion as per the recommendation. All those in favour? All those against? We have a tied vote, therefore I'll exercise the Mayor's casting vote right, and I will vote to defeat that motion. Thank you, councillors, and in the event of that happening, I am led to believe, but I'll just check with the Governance Officer, that the existing policy remains in place until it's next reviewed. Is that correct? Thank you. Thanks very much. Item 8.2, the Advocacy Plan. Councillors, there is a recommendation on page 25 of 82. Thank you. Happy to move? Councillor, a question? Different. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that we defer that till the next council meeting, given that we only received the final version at around 11 o'clock this morning. I haven't been able to go through and make sure what the changes might have been from the draft that we received late on Friday. So I move that we defer the matter till the next council meeting.
Before I seek a seconder for that one, Councillor Mildren, I just wanted to ask a question. In the political timeframes and everything, what does that do to the organisation, Deb, if we defer a month?
Through you, Mr Mayor. With the state elections, well, they're not until November, but certainly the federal elections are before us. This is an advocacy plan that will allow us to be able to advocate on some of those key items that councillors have agreed that are priorities for the community. So really it's up to councillors as to whether they want a position or whether we just go with the priorities that have been listed as those priority projects.
Thank you, Acting CEO. Councillor Bennett, question?
Yeah, can I just, on that point, can I just get some commentary then from Friday, what has changed in the document that we've got now in front of us?
Sorry.
Through you, Mr Mayor. What we've added is the economic return data on the bottom, and I'm led to believe, Kelly, and the strategic advantages have been put in there, and they're straight out of our website, the strategic advantages.
So, councillors, do we have a seconder to push that back to a later date for consideration? Thank you, Councillor Hall. Councillor Mildren. Put the motion. All those in favour? All those against? The mover asked me to put the motion. Yeah. Are you abstaining? Yeah, from the vote. Do a recount? Call a division. That's probably the safest way to do it, right? We'll call a division. So therefore, all those in favour, Councillor Quilty, Councillor Mildren and Councillor Hall. All those against, Councillor Polton, Councillor Simpfendorfer, Councillor Bennett, keep your hand up. Thank you very much. We have a tied vote. Therefore, I have to exercise my casting vote. And councillors, I will vote to defeat that motion. And councillors, I guess we're back to a motion of the recommendation, Governance Officer. If somebody was happy to move as per, thanks, Councillor Bennett. A seconder, Councillor Simpfendorfer. Anybody speaking against or want to enter the debate? If so, I'll get Councillor Bennett to start off. Thank you, Councillor Bennett.
Look, the information's here, and as the acting CEO said, the only information that's been added is information that we already had anyway on our council website. So I think it's a really sound document. We certainly need this going into the looming federal election, and it does certainly point out all these projects aren't council leading, a council implementing all of these. These are around the advocacy that council plays a role in these particular projects, and all these projects certainly have come through when we've been looking at community consultation, the council plan. This is what our community want, and this is being really clear about what council's role is and having this information, as shovel ready as possible, which we know is the only way things get funded is if they're shovel ready. So I'm really happy with everything that's presented. This is information that we've seen before. Happy to have this in this format.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Simpfendorfer.
I can't add any more to that, Mr Mayor. I think I'm happy to put the motion at the right point.
Councillor Hall wanted to enter the debate on this one.
Yeah, just quickly, we, at the council briefing on Monday, we did discuss advocacy, but we didn't have that paper in front of us, which I've, having seen it just a couple of hours before the council meeting, because Councillor Bennett did state that it didn't get sent through until Friday. Well, I only really just had a proper look at the whole thing, final product. It came through at 11 o'clock this morning, and I wasn't home this morning, and I didn't have my phone on me, so I didn't see it until this afternoon. So I think it's only fair that we have normally our briefings are supposed to be with us 5 days before, so we can have the opportunity to discuss at a council briefing, but this time I support Councillor Milton, because I do believe he is correct that we haven't had time to really assess the papers.
Thanks, Councillor Hall. Councillor Quilty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Fortunately, I did have time to have a read just today, so my a study of this document was limited to our discussions about the various projects that we had previously, plus the final product that I read this morning. Look, this advocacy paper has a lot of very good and valuable projects. However, I have a couple of concerns. Haven't actually made up my mind yet on whether I'm going to vote against or for over these two pieces of concern I have, but I would like to voice them. Firstly, Junction Place, the first project quoted in the paper. We are looking to work with Development Victoria to ensure timely and appropriate development on this significant CBD site. I would like to see something very important from my point of view added to it. I think that our role as community representatives, and certainly I see it as my role, is to advocate for as much community participation in it as possible. And I would like to see it reflected in this document, advocating for a form of a committee or oversight or management group that includes community representatives. I think we should advocate for that. And the other thing is not about a particular project in here, but the overall approach that we have. I would like to discuss or caution fellow councillors against it's a fine balance kind of thing. It's a good idea to apply for government grants because government grants come out of people's income tax, and what council puts towards them is the rates which are paid after income tax. So it makes it slightly better for the tax and ratepayers. However, I think it is important for us strategically to set out priorities that we have according to the budget that we have, and treat every grant we get from the government as a bonus, rather than going around and chasing various grants available and then ending up with several big projects that we have and throwing millions after millions and then a few more millions after COVID hit. Not criticizing any particular project, just calling out to my fellow councillors to consider this approach. Have it very clear what we are prioritizing, regardless of what funding is available in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Quilty. Councillor Bennett in closing. Councillor Mildred.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's a whole range of things that I see with this document. I'll start with the process. We had a briefing meeting last week, Monday, I think it was. This matter was sort of listed and there was no draft report for us to look at. We had a conversation in the briefing meeting. I hope I'm not breaching confidentialities with this and talking about a briefing meeting, by the way. We had conversations in the briefing meeting that led to the formation of a list, the list that fundamentally appears in this. Now, how that was reached, people can make their own mind up whether that was decision-making or what it was in the briefing meeting. But nonetheless, that's the way it transpired broadly. The second thing is, The agenda documentation came out Wednesday, and again, it says document to be tabled, no document included with the agenda papers. Friday, quite late Friday afternoon, and I didn't see the email until Sunday, but quite late Friday afternoon, there was a email, I think, or a text that arrived that had the original first cut of this document, which then was followed up with a document, and I accept that the changes are relatively insignificant. I take the officer's word on it, but that document's come out. Now, that's the process to where we've got to today. So I'm saying basically that my observation is this document has been very hastily put together, and I would venture to say it's probably been hastily put together because we've got elections in the wings coming at us with a rapid rate of knots, both federally and at state level. And I'd say this document's been put together to try and secure some pork barrelling in our direction. Now, that may or may not be a good or bad thing. People can make their own minds up about that. I have my own opinions, but it doesn't matter. To go to the next bit though, most importantly, I think this is a schizophrenic document. It can't decide if it's a strategic plan with things that council should be producing and funding and developing as a part of the role and responsibilities of council, and the advocacy process which goes with council going to other levels of government and other organisational aspirational groups to try and garner support for projects that might not be part of the council's budget and part of the council's actual bailiwick. They're things that might be things that advocate for. Now, we've got a bit of both in there. So if we've got both in there, then it's a schizophrenic document and it's not really fit for purpose. So I don't think I can support the document. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mildren. That's 2 taps on the wrist. I don't even have a wristwatch anymore, so. Councillor Bennett, in closing.
So, as detailed in the report, the plan shows the priority areas that have been identified through community consultation and can be found in the council plan, capital works program, and other relevant policies, plans, and strategies adopted by council. And in that document, when council reports back to us and we get into the nitty gritty, we look at are we advocating, are we delivering, are we partnering? So it is clear. All of these projects we have been briefed on. The only thing that is different is it's been actually all pulled together in this one document, which is fantastic, and thanks to the staff for getting it done so quickly. We've been briefed on all of this, so I'm certainly not going to postpone this just because a councillor didn't read their emails today.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Therefore, councillors, I put the motion. All those in favour? All those against? All right, casting Kev, here we go. As the Mayor, I'll exercise my casting vote to carry the motion. Item 8.4. The CEO Employment and Remuneration advertising additional spend. Councillors, this comes as no surprise to any of you. We've obviously been working away with our ERAC, and through the recommendation, we're given the suggestion that we search more broadly. Councillor Mildren, question, or did you want to move?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Should the wording not be that a budget variation be approved for an additional sum?
Semantics, happy to have you test the floor on that one, Councillor Mildred. Do you want to move it that way? Yeah, move it that way. Do I have a seconder? No? I just need a seconder. Do we have a seconder? Yep, thank you, Councillor Simpfendorfer. Does anyone wish to speak against the additional spend? I'll carry that one unanimously. Thank you, councillors, for item 8.4. Item 9, reports for noting, which there's none. Reports for information, folks, at item 10. The finance report for February 2022. Again, as usual, please pull me up, councillors, if there's something you want to mention. Or yes, Councillor Quilty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Finance report. Not much that I would like to mention, and there was just one question I have been asked, and Officer Klein has already replied via email. However, since the question was asked, I think it would be good to speak to it at the public meeting. In Table 5 loans, there is a NAB loan which is maturing on 20th of June 2023. The balance owing at the moment is 1.4 million. The question was whether there is a balloon payment or any other significant amount of money due before the end of the loan, the maturing of the loan, that needs to be included in our 22-23 budget. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so our NAB loan has got quarterly instalments on it, so $252,000 every quarter. So if you count out, when last instalment was paid last week, which is not included in this finance report. And as we're getting towards the end of the loan and the principal is getting very low, the interest component of those repayments is diminishing quite rapidly.
Thank you, Officer Klein. Item 10.2 is the planning report for Feb. 10.3 is the building report. 10.4 is the competitive services report for Feb. 10.5 is the Two Cities, One Community Action Plan. 21, Councillor Bennett.
Yes, so on page 57, we're talking about exploring renewable energy options with Albury, and we've got that we establish new partnerships with providers. So are we doing some kind of joint work in terms of renewables with Albury?
Question for acting... Oh, no. Officer Schultz, thank you very much.
Mr Mayor, through you, Councillor Bennett, if I can take that on notice and provide you with some information in the morning, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Officer Schultz. Thank you, Councillor Bennett. 10.6 is the record of councillor meetings, and 10.7 is the decisions register. Councillors, we move on to item 11, which is notices of motion, of which we have one. Draw your attention to page 54, I believe it is. No, so 71 of 82 of your agenda. And I had indicated, councillors, I would be prepared to move this one should I not find somebody on the floor that's prepared to move it. So, Councillor Mildren, Councillor Simpfendorfer. You look nothing... Oh, you both got a blue suit and you both got glasses. Sorry, Councillor Simpfendorfer. You're happy to move the notice of motion. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bennett. Thank you. Councillor Simpfendorfer.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm moving this motion for a number of reasons. However, I wish to make it very clear that it's important to realise when, with after a thought and some research, that we can own that and try and rectify a situation. That's why I think we're at this point. This motion in itself, I believe, does both. And as a councillor, I've had many, many discussions with our community, both members and businesses across that spectrum, and are affected by the history of and the intentions of Junction Place. That's a given. This is the point I wish to highlight, and this is the intention of this motion. That's the point I want to highlight. The intent of this motion is to get back to the table with DV, Development Victoria, and engage with the community as to the next steps and work collaboratively. I don't say that lightly. There are many different views on how this should play out. What is important, though, and to note, is to reflect on the community's comments and those hands that were raised in that December meeting. So I guess what is next? Even if Development Victoria were to ask us and come to us today, what is next on behalf of council? And that's what I've been asked from our community. What is next with Junction Place? How do we answer that? And at the moment, I don't think we can, because this motion, I believe, can reset that strategy, that thinking, and gets us to the table with DV, Development Victoria. The motion, as I said, is a chance to reset and not reinvent, and adhere to the intention of those that have gone before us as councillors and the staff that are here with their greatest intention. We need a seat at that table on behalf of our community. With how the resolution was at the point of December, and there was some potential for unintended consequences from my research, and these are real. We need to protect the intention of Junction Place. That's why I'm moving this motion. I'm of the firm belief that this motion achieves the best place for us and council, reflecting not only the council, but the community's views and expectations to achieve the desired outcomes. That is what is best for our city. We have to ask ourselves, and that of DV, what will set our city heart as the premier place to live, invest and visit for our future. That is the intent of this motion, nothing more, nothing less. And I know that will be what the council staff, both the mayor and myself and other councillors, are working very hard to achieve. Thank Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Simpfendorfer. Councillor Bennett, reserving right. Councillors, debate is open. Councillor Quilty.
A question, please. Mr. Mayor, to you probably, but anybody else who would like to pitch in. What's wrong with reinstating the comprehensive development zone? Why do we want to abandon the idea?
I'm happy to take that question if you'd like me to answer it in my view, but I won't be speaking until later on. Obviously to the motion, I still plan on speaking to it, but there was some commentary today and through the course of the 3 months from the community around a protection required over the significance, I guess, of Junction Place, which I think all councillors, bar one of us, perhaps reflected on the night of the 13th of December. And I think we've attempted as council to make sure there's a protection, but unfortunately, and I might refer to a planning expert because I'm no planning expert and divert the question to you, Officer Schultz, perhaps through your team, but the ACZ, from my understanding, didn't offer any more or perhaps potentially less protection than the CDZ. Am I correct in what my research has shown me?
Mr Mayor, I don't want to preempt a future planning permit application, nor do I want to predetermine an outcome of a future planning permit application. What I can say is that a bottle shop application, planning permit application, either under the CDZ or under the ACZ, is not a prohibited use. So it is my assessment and that of my teams that if a bottle shop application were to be submitted, it will be considered. It is not prohibited.
Thank you. So into the debate, councillors. Councillor Courty, go.
Another question is why aren't we trying to, I know that we only can ask and nicely, however, why aren't we trying very hard to ask nicely to involve community representatives in the decision? At point 2, we are talking about requesting a meeting with councillors and relevant officers. Why aren't we trying for one with councillors, relevant officers and community stakeholders?
So I'll answer that question as well, Councillor Quilty. I think if you read on in point 2 where it mentions to ensure with the council and the Wodonga community what their next plans are, I think the intent, which Councillor Simpfendorfer seems to have picked up on a bit as well, is around ensuring we can have a conversation. But, you know, I'm looking for debate here, councillors, so happy to enter and I'll speak at the appropriate time to the motion. Councillor Mildren, no? If Councillor Quilty would like to speak for or against the motion, she can, but I thought she just had 2 questions. Councillor Quilty didn't have a microphone, but she'd like to listen to some more experienced councillors. So, councillors, the debate's open. Councillor Mildren, go.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There's a whole range of things. I'm a bit disappointed in Officer Schultz's response there because it was so narrow and so limited in the way it approached this issue. This issue is not entirely about having a grog shop located in the zone, and there's a horde of applications that can be made for all sorts of uses that might transpire either under the CDZ and or under the ACZ. The biggest problem we face though is the ACZ opens the door for an array of developments as well as other uses that weren't envisaged and essentially permitted under the CDZ. The CDZ controlled the development of the site to what it looks like. It doesn't end up with a tin shed, irrespective as to whether the tin shed's a bottle shop or something else. It could be anything. The CDZ goes back to the first principles about the solid structural form that the Junction Place area takes as a significant part of our central business area and our township fabric. That's the first bit. There's a whole range of other things that we're just not considering. Our role, we need to build a position of strength to go into conversation. Sure, we're not the landowners, but we're not the landowners on any piece of land, but we do go out and put the planning rules in place that deal with private landowners all over the place. And we should be dealing with a piece of government land as best as possible in the circumstances in the same strategic manner. And to go into any of those things, to go into conversations with a minister to get rezonings done, we need to have a position of strength as best we can achieve. Now, that's going to be variable, and sometimes the strength might be relatively weak, and sometimes it might be stronger. But we should be trying to build the best strength we can for any conversation we have. We shouldn't be going cap in hand saying to Development Victoria, oh, what do you want to do? That's just not the right answer. We are the responsible authority for all planning approvals that happen on the site at the present minute until the minister takes it off us if we show that we can't do it and don't understand what we're doing. And we are the planning authority. Now, I suspect if I ask that question of every single councillor around the room, what is the responsible authority and what is the planning authority and what are their roles, I don't think any other councillor in the room would be able to answer the question. We must and should know these things. They're fundamental to what our role is, so that we don't abrogate any responsibilities. Now, the motion that we put in December was an element of strength that added to where we can go in trying to negotiate through this. There's a whole range of things where that could come off and the minister could say, well, that's it, I've had enough of you lot, I'm going to take over responsibility for all planning. That's possible. Or DV could just say, no, look, we're not interested in what you really want to say, we're going to do all these things. It's possible. If we go there without the right level of preparation and background work and all the things that we should have in place to give us a level of strength, then we're not going to get an outcome. And everything that I've seen since December is pointing towards weakening our position. And that's just the result of where we're going with this. Sure, we've got to have conversations with Development Victoria. We really should be having conversations with our community groups and taking up opportunities to speak to them at every opportunity we get on this sort of thing, because they're going to make or break it. So I think it's critically important that, one, we have a structure put in place, and none of this resolution doesn't give us any structure at all. And I think until we put those things in place, the resolution of December is the best we've got. I'm not saying it's perfect, it's far from it. But it's the best we've got, and that's to give us an element of strength. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mildren. Councillors, Councillor Hall?
Yeah, look, for starters, I don't understand why this notice of motion is being put forward. I agree with Councillor Mildren. We all supported the motion back in December, and I thought it made for a fairly good position or strong stance that the council were making on Junction Place. Most of the community and myself know what happened with the Dan Murphy planning decision, and that Development Victoria terminated the contractor with the Central Place. But the reason for the changes in the first place is we didn't want to see this happening again. Like the fact with Dan Murphy's, if we didn't have diligent ratepayers that saw that planning application on our council website, we wouldn't even be discussing this, because it would have gone straight through. We wouldn't have even known about it. And that's the disappointing thing. And that's why I think we do need to have a strong position. I think looking at the changes to the Planning Act will create that stronger position. I know Officer Schultz has said it would make no difference between the activity zone and the proposed planning changes, but I don't necessarily agree with that. I think the activity zone opens it up. We are more open to a lot more activities being able to be planned there, and I think we need to play quite tight in that area and consultate with the community. I have no issues with supporting a request to meeting Development Victoria. I mean, I think that's a given. Development Victoria have said they want to work with council and the community. So, I mean, I would expect that they would honour those comments. So the reasoning behind this just doesn't make sense. I mean, you know, we were already in a position that we were we're already in a position that the community were, from what I've seen, happy with. They were happy with the decisions that we made, and we do need to work further with our community to investigate what they want to see in that position. I don't see that this notice of motion will achieve anything of what the community were looking for.
Thanks, Councillor Hall. Councillor Quilty, have you got anything to add to the debate before I enter it? Okay, so, councillors, as I said, are you happy for me to speak to this before I come back to you as a reserved right? Is that okay, Councillor Bennett? So, councillors, I see the concern. I see and hear a very common thread, and I guess that's what led me to drafting this notice of motion, because it's not wildly different to the one that we had on the 13th of December in terms of the intent to try to get councillors and community members and DV and everyone all in the one room to say we have to do better than that. And yes, there's indications that that's some of the community, some of DV's feedback, Councillor Hall. You're right, they've said they're prepared to work with us. But in my view, and the reason for drafting this motion is we're not prepared to work with them yet. We're lacking clarity in the community. Now, when I say clarity, it's our organisation, probably first and foremost, the community, second, if not probably on par. You've got other property owners that have approached me within our CBA. There's 500 or so of them, right? They've approached me and said, so what does this mean? Because of what happened at Junction, you're going to change my planning provisions? There's a bit of confusion. We need to create clarity there. But I think what Councillor Milton said earlier in the piece was pretty true. The importance around the history that everybody, not just councillors, not just DV, not just the community, some of the things that I've observed and have been parroted or continue to be discussed incorrectly in public and also private forums can only be addressed by an open conversation at the start. We haven't enabled ourselves at this point in time, in my view, to have that conversation. So the intent of this motion, I know there's been plenty of people, including some of my own councillors, that have been a bit confused or perhaps critical of it, and some of that has been on record, but the intent of this motion isn't to do nothing. The intent of this motion is for, instead of 3 months later, still sitting here awkwardly, I hope someone's got the stopwatch on, is the intent of this is for actually us to start a conversation with the community members involved. And that's just one group of interest. That's everybody who's had the chance. But I would like to point out the community's had the chance in 2016, 2011, all different points in time to engage on that parcel of land. But what we've inherited is something that hasn't come to full fruition in what was hopefully a timely manner. And then suddenly we've had something we're not happy with. So the intent of this notice of motion was, as I said, to get the conversation started with all the right people at the table. That conversation has to start somewhere. I don't think we should delay it any longer while opportunities still present. For the record, as I said, whilst not a planner, I think the ACZ did let us down over this specific parcel of land. I wouldn't disagree. I wouldn't think a council would disagree with my statement on that. But what I do say is what is required. Now, I want you just discount the if any for a moment, because the way I'm thinking behind this is we might say rolling back to CDZ is not the correct way, but we need to do this. But again, we start with that with a conversation, in my view. I then think about things if we don't need to make any changes. Let's just say DV and the council themselves have copped bad enough reputational damage through this process leading up to December from very heightened community opinion and views. What if they've learnt to not do the same thing again? What if we genuinely are about to spend a ratepayer's money on going down a planning provision change, which could take some time at an unknown expense at this point, if we don't need to? That's why I'm saying, if any. Like, do we need to? I can't answer that question at the moment. I think we might need to look at what conditions are on things that happen in that particular parcel of land, but I don't know what the answer to that is at this moment. So I guess we need to think about all that, and we're here now. The protection on this parcel of land, is it good enough? I guess that's part of the consideration. Does a conversation as per the notice of motion a notice of motion get us closer towards a satisfactory outcome for the community and our organisation? I believe it does, but I know it will be tested on the floor. Thank you, Deb, for tapping your wrist. We need to do better and no more surprises. Thank you. Councillor Bennett, you've reserved your right as a seconder.
So at the last council meeting, this discussion was shut down due to a minor procedural matter. So I'm really glad that we're actually having this here tonight because the community do deserve to hear the debate on this. But I do just want to, before I get into the debate, just address something before. Councillor Mildren criticised Officer Schultz about his answer being narrow. Officer Schultz answered the question very specifically from the Mayor. So thank you for being very specific in your answer, Officer Schultz. So I supported this motion coming up for debate because I'm now aware with the zoning change, there's some unintended consequences it throws over the existing businesses who own or have recently purchased land in that area under the existing zoning. So when I've...
We've had a point of order called by Councillor Mildren. The status of the point of order and what are you referencing, Councillor Mildren?
Mr Mayor, it's a point of order in relation to fact. There's a principle within the planning law which says existing uses and existing development rights apply, and if we change the zoning, it has no impact whatsoever on existing uses and existing developments within the area.
Thanks, Councillor Mildren. I'm just going to take 60 seconds to check with our governance officer because I just can't find the matter of fact in my governance rules, but I could be wrong. I'll just adjourn for 60 seconds, councillors, just till I find out. Councillor Mildren, having not been able to identify somewhere in the governance rules of which we can take that point of order, and after consulting with the governance officer and the acting CEO, there is no point of order there in what sounds like a difference of opinion. Councillor Bennett, please continue.
Thank you. So when I vote on items, I vote considering on all the information that I have at the time, and seeing as though we literally had no time to consider this planning zone change, I'm prepared to say that now that I have more info, looking back, I don't think that decision was the best. But I want to clarify, the intent of not supporting a bottle shop is absolutely still true for me. The intent that the master plan needs improvement, absolutely still true for me. If the council does go down this path with changing the zoning and throwing out 3 years' worth of work, we become the red tape. We get in the way. Now, from everything that I've heard from the community, they don't want council being the red tape. They don't want council to get in the way. So people have been asking for updates, which Councillor Simpfendorfer alluded to, but because we're in limbo with this planning issue, there are no updates and there might not be for ages. So much of the frustration that I heard from community, from public around this was that the planning scheme did actually allow for the bottle shop to even put in the permits. So for me, one of the main concerns, and Councillor Poulton has talked about this, is what protections do we need to put in place to ensure that we could prevent a bottle shop going in. So I think this is the right step forward and I'm really happy to support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Simpfendorfer in closing.
Probably very quickly, Mr Mayor, because I think most has been said around the room, but the final point I'll come back to is it's an intent, and that's what this motion is at its heart, and that's what should be at our city's heart. And I think everyone around the room has the absolute best interests of what we want to achieve down there, and I think this is the best way forward, which is why I supported the motion as it was. Very clearly, it's been pointed out, it's not just about Dan Murphy's. There's a whole other range, not to quote, but there's a whole range of reasons and a whole range of other impacts that are on that site and the greater CBD, not just about Dan Murphy's. But again, my stance is, as I voted back in December 13, to not go with what that was, and in the best interest of our community, actually get the best for our city to be the absolute best city regionally in Australia. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Simpfendorfer. Councillors, I therefore put the motion. All those in favour? All those against? All right, once again, we have a tied vote, councillors. I'll therefore execute the Mayor's casting vote, in which I will do so to carry that motion this evening. We have moving on to item 12, we have a petition, councillors, which you will see regarding the opening of waves and at specific hours throughout the winter seasons and what have you. There is a recommendation there on page 72 out of 82 that the petition be referred to the Acting Chief Executive Officer for report to a future council meeting. Bit of legwork to do. Councillor Bennett move as recommendation. Seconder, Councillor Hall. Does anyone wish to speak against? No, all good. Carried. The council seal in item 13, we have none. Acting CEO. The general business, item 14, we have none. Urgent business, item 15, we have none. Question time at 16. Acting CEO, your turn. I believe have we got 2 or 3?
We have
Two.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor. Question 1 comes from Mr Chris Phillips. His question is, in the 21-22 budget, can someone explain why Business Unit 513, Lake Hume Reserve, loses $37,413 when we maintain this on behalf of Goulburn Murray Water? The answer is that Lake Hume Reserves are 50-50 joint funded with Goulburn Murray Water. So the amount of $37,413 is council's half share of the cost to maintain the reserves. Goulburn Murray Water's contribution is a little bit over that at $41,000. Question 2 from Mr Chris Phillips is, what is the business unit associated with all the costs for Hyphen, which is the library art gallery? The answer is the business units are 014 library. The total business cost is 1.07 million. And for the art space, which is part of Hyphen, the business unit is 035 art space Wodonga. The total business unit cost is 0.61 million. So thank you, Mr Phillips, and we will get a letter out to you just confirming the answers to those questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Acting CEO. Councillors, item 17, confidential business, as we close the meeting to the public, page 77 of 82. Somebody happy to move? Councillor Bennett, thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Simpfendorfer. Anyone speaking against? No, we close. Right. Thanks for those who have stuck around through the in-camera part of the meeting to come back. Council's looking for someone to move that we adopt the recommendations from the closed meeting. Councillor Bennett, thank you. Seconder. Councillor Hall, anyone wish to speak against? No. Carried. Thank you very much. And essentially that leaves us at the point of close of meeting. So thank you, councillors. Thanks to those that have streamed and thanks to officers.